The meeting will be called to order. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, this committee will study systemic racism and religious discrimination. We have a group of witnesses in our first hour, which is from 3:30 to 4:30, which means that because we started late, we may have to go a little beyond 4:30 in the first group. And we have as individuals Raymond J. D'Souza, the International Christian Voice, Peter Batty, Chairman, and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, Jay Cameron, barrister and solicitor. Welcome. And here's how the protocols go. You have 10 minutes each to present, and then there will be a round of questions, and we will be able to have a 7-minute round. In this one, I don't think we will have time for 2 rounds, just simple math. And so I will ask you to beginning with Father D'Souza for 10 minutes, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the invitation to address this committee regarding Motion 103. There are several issues addressed by the motion, and the language is, at least to my ear, sufficiently bureaucratic to make it difficult to understand what exactly is being contemplated. It is difficult, therefore, to respond with any great degree of specificity, but if you permit me to make 4 points that I think are related to the motion. The first one is that racism and religious discrimination are different things, though this motion appears to treat them alike. Race, of course, regards characteristics inherited at birth. Religion is a matter of faith and practice which can change. For example, a Pakistani who decides to become Christian does not change his race or nationality, but his religion. I am honored today to be in the presence of Peter Batty, brother of the martyr Shahbaz Bhatti. Shahbaz was killed out of hatred for his Catholic faith by people who shared the same race, but were of the Islamic faith. Religions, of course, include many different races. For example, my church, the Catholic Church, is by far the most multiracial institution on earth. Yet every day Catholics endure persecution, even martyrdom, and it is not because of their race. Anti-racism efforts do not, therefore, address the problem of religious discrimination. Second point, the motion condemns all forms of religious discrimination and calls upon the government to advance initiatives to better reflect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I note that freedom of religion and conscience is the first fundamental freedom enumerated in our Charter. I welcome a robust embrace of religious freedom, but note that it is often the government, through legislation and regulation, that impinges upon religious freedom. That is true for Jews and Christians as well as Muslims. Therefore, to focus on one particular religion would be, I think, unwise. A renewed culture of religious freedom is to be welcomed, especially in a political culture where often all religious belief and practice is accorded second-class status. Christians, Muslims, Jews, and other religious believers do encounter a sort of secular fundamentalism that is incompatible with Canada's heritage of religious freedom, pluralism, and tolerance. If this motion were to lead to a renewed culture of religious freedom, that would be praiseworthy. Point 3, Islamophobia is a term, I suppose, that is meant to capture hatred of Muslims, which is rather straightforward to deplore. The question is whether Islamophobia includes a critical evaluation of Islamic doctrine and practice. For example, Christians and Muslims have quite different understandings of God. One sees this made clear, for example, on the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which quote passages of the Quran which deny the doctrine of the Trinity, the foundational doctrine of Christianity. Doctrinal and moral disagreements can be engaged as we live together with our differences. I don't imagine that the Government of Canada wishes to engage in theological matters which are outside its competence, but neither should it seek to discourage theological exchange, even critical theological exchange. A fourth point, honest and respectful theological exchange is all the more important in the face of religiously inspired violence, regardless of which group it's directed against. I quote, for example, from former President Bill Clinton on the question he was addressing of radical Islamist violence. He says, "How should we respond? We can try to kill and capture them, but we can't get them all. We can try to persuade them to abandon violence, but if our arguments have no basis in their own experience, we can't fully succeed. Our best chance is to work cooperatively with those in the Muslim world who are trying to reach the same minds as the radicals by preaching a more complete Islam, not a distorted, jagged shard." That's from Bill Clinton's introduction to a book on religion and foreign policy by Madeleine Albright, his Secretary of State. It is extraordinary to hear a statesman speak about the need for a better preaching, in this case of Islam, which is the task of theologians and clergy primarily, not governments. Yet President Clinton acknowledges what we all know, namely that this better preaching is an urgent task. Canada is perhaps well suited for this necessary dialogue and exchange to take place, which is primarily theological. We have here in our country an Islamic community that is able to speak freely and to carry out respectful dialogue with other religions. That is not the case everywhere in the Islamic world. Such theological work will be challenging and even provocative. But we have a tradition in Canada that will enable us to undertake it with respect and tolerance. Concerns, therefore, about Islamophobia, however understood, ought not to prevent that necessary work, that challenging and even provocative dialogue from being done. Thank you for granting me the opportunity to address you. I pray God's blessings upon your work.
Thank you very much, Father D'Souza. And we now go to Peter Batty, the chairman of the International Christian Voice, for 7 minutes, please. For 10 minutes, sorry.
Honorable Chairman, members of committee, I would like to thank Heritage Committee to giving me opportunity to address the fears and concerns of my community of Pakistani heritage regarding Motion 103. I come here today as a concerned Canadian citizen and as chairman of the International Christian Voice. My brother Shahbaz Bhatti, Minister of Minorities Affairs, was assassinated in Pakistan in 2011 for protecting the rights of persecuted religious minorities. Canadian Pakistani origin has chosen to call Canada their new home because of the religious liberty, freedoms, and democratic system that they can enjoy here and which allow them to thrive and prosper. We left our homes to live in a country where we are free to voice our opinions and concerns without fear and hesitance, whether they are religious, social, political, or otherwise. I believe this is an essential part of the framework of our free society in Canada. M103 has created a great concern regarding the impact it will have on religious freedom and the freedom of expression on us, our children, grandchildren, and generations to follow. Our main concern lies within the definition of the term Islamophobia, which is unclear and confusing term. We all believe that the discrimination and prejudice against any individual based on their Muslim faith is intolerable and unacceptable. However, the ill-defined prospect of Islamophobia can also be used to take away the fundamental freedom of all Canadians to lawfully and respectfully criticize any Islamic religious idea. The potential result that the motion imposes is the cause of growing anxiety within my community and the community across Canada. The fears of Pakistani Christian immigrants living in Canada are not imaginary. the consequences of being labeled under M103 under the garb of Islamophobia can have indirect effect on our relatives and friends who are still living in Pakistan, a country in which blasphemy laws hold a sentence of life in prison or death. The blasphemy laws has been misused to settle personal, economic, political disputes and have resulted in the assassination of murders of members of my family's, friends, and prominent member of our community. We are fear that M103 will foster similar conditions of suffocation and oppression, while cultivating an environment of division and disharmony in our communities. These are the same situation we came to Canada to escape and avoid forever. I fear that unclear definition of Islamophobia can be used as a tool by vested Islamist activists to manipulate Canadians' law to restrict free speech and criminalize non-Muslims for expressing, celebrating, defending their respective faiths. In our community's humble opinion, there was no need to table M103 singling out Islamophobia. Will it really change attitude of the better? Why a special focus on one religion? Are the existing laws not sufficient to protect religious freedoms? If not, then why not motion restricting prejudice against all religions? Our community concern is that the motion will, in some manner, stop valid criticism of Islamic terror and will prevent our children from standing up to defend criticism of their own faiths. My family, friends, and community very strongly believe and urge that Canadian laws should not be diluted to accept regulation imposed on us through international influence. To cite an example, one only has to take a look at England, where the government gave into demands of Muslim population who demanded and got a change from the historical common law to Sharia law in some of their cities. This has had a devastating effect on original British inhabitants who have moved out. In 2011, Britain's Muslims began demanding that Sharia replace the British common law and became the only law in the towns where large Muslim population, including Manchester, Liverpool, and several other towns. In one such East London enclave, their streets are plastered with the poster declaring, "You are entering a Sharia control zone, Islamic rules in force," and where Muslims imams are now issue death threat to women who refuse to wear the hijab. Over 100 Sharia law courts have been established across the UK, and these Sharia courts have been issuing rulings that contradicted British common law. British Prime Minister David Cameron said in 2011, "Multiculturalism has been failure and has promoted Islamic extremism across Europe." If M103 is not opposed and altered to include our religious group in Canada, we feel that this push toward exclusive individual treatment will not stop here. Instead of creating peace and harmony between different faith communities, this motion will only move us into direction of division and separation. We, in our community, do not want to see our next generation being led back into what we have faced and escaped from. As a Christian community, we will stand and continue to voice our fears and our concerns, so our children and grandchildren never again will have to go through what their parents and grandparents have been through. We will stand on guard for Canada. Once again, thank you so much for giving me opportunity. God bless Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batty. And our third witness in this session is going to be Mr. Jay Cameron, barrister and solicitor from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. For 10 minutes, please, Mr. Cameron.
Thank you. Honorable members of Parliament, thank you for having me here today. I'm here on behalf of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. It's a registered charity, nonpartisan, non-religious, and receives no government funding. It's dedicated to upholding the charter freedoms of Canadians, particularly those in Section 2. I'm going to discuss 4 things today in brief. First, a brief refresher on the importance of freedom of thought and expression in our democratic society. 2, I'm going to talk about the threatening and vague language of the motion itself. I'm going to talk about vagueness and its terms in the motion, particularly in regard to Islamophobia. And number 4, I'm going to talk about, if I have time, some of the threatening and alarming talk from witnesses. The Supreme Court of Canada has stated that the very lifeblood of democracy is the free exchange of ideas and opinions. In the case of Edmonton Journal versus Alberta, Justice Corey stated that it is difficult to imagine a right more important to a democratic society than freedom of expression. Indeed, a democracy cannot exist without that freedom to express new ideas and put forward opinions about the functioning of public institutions. The courts have repeatedly held that freedom of expression should only be limited in the clearest of cases. Freedom of expression, however, does not just protect speakers, it also protects listeners, and this point is especially relevant because of comments that you heard last Wednesday in regard to radio poubelle, trash radio, from one of your witnesses. In Canada, people can have opinions about trash radio and call it trash radio. It's a free country, and you can say that. But in Canada, citizens of this country get to determine what is trash, not the government. In Harper versus Canada, the majority of the court noted that the right of people to discuss and debate new ideas forms the very foundation of democracy. In speaking specifically of the need of citizens to hear, the majority of the court stated that freedom of expression protects not only the individual who speaks the message, but also the recipient, i.e. the recipients of trash radio, so-called. And I'll pause to note that the calling of something trash, of course, dismisses any content of value that it may have. It's just like me referring to a witness before this committee as a trash witness. The appropriate thing to do is to contradict the thoughts that he had and rebut them with more constitutional and more enlightened thoughts. Freedom of expression and hearing is not a Canadian idiosyncrasy. It is the right to receive information that is both enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Canada is a signatory to both. American case law, which has been referenced as just as relevant in Canada as it is in the United States, has said that freedom to speak and the freedom to hear are inseparable. They are two sides of the same coin. The coin itself is the process of thought and discussion. The motion before you states that there is a rising public climate of hate and fear in this country which the government needs to quell. I don't know how the word quell got past the House of Commons, but I can tell you right now that the word quell is a concerning word. It is defined as to thoroughly overwhelm and reduce to submission or passivity and to put down forcibly and suppress. It is language that is frequently used in the context of riots, not in the upholding of constitutional freedoms of Canadians. The word quell in the motion only serves to increase concerns about M103. It hints at compulsion with an implied use of force. This committee should be exceedingly wary of assuming that there is a rising public climate of hate and fear in this country. According to the 2017 Global Peace Index, which was presented at the United Nations this year, Canada is the 8th safest country out of 163 nations globally. The largely peaceful day-to-day coexistence of millions of people from various races, cultures, and religions in Canada contradicts the assertion that there is a rising climate of hate and fear in this country that requires a forceful legislative response. Existing laws already place careful limits on conduct between Canadians. I'm referring to the criminal law, human rights laws, tort laws, and defamation laws. As John Stuart Mills noted, the third and most cogent reason for restricting the interference of government is the great evil of adding unnecessarily to its power. It is not the government's role to make everyone love each other. Government's role is to uphold constitutional freedoms. That brings me to M103. And the term Islamophobia. The word is not defined in the motion. This committee has been asked to study and put forward recommendations in regard to the elimination of Islamophobia. I don't know what it is, but worse, neither do you. Worst of all, you've been asked to craft a legislative response to it. MP Iqra Khalid proposed that Islamophobia is the irrational fear of Islam. This definition raises more problems than answers, not the least of which is whether Parliament can constitutionally legislate against an irrational fear. If there is an irrational fear of Islam, does that mean that there may be rational fears or concerns that are not Islamophobic? And where would you draw the line between the two? Canada is one of the safest countries in the world, but other people who live in other nations are not so fortunate. The Middle East and North Africa is ranked by the GPI as the least peaceful nation in the world for the fifth successive year this year. Political instability is rife there. There are wars and internal fighting, and they are fundamentally less safe than this country is. Is it Islamophobic for Canadians to be concerned about how the immigration of persons from these nations may impact the safety of Canada? Is it Islamophobic to conclude that the nations which are ruled by a combination of mosque and state are far less safe than Canada and are repeatedly and consistently ranked among the most dangerous countries in the world? Should it be illegal to express such concerns? WADI is a non-government organization operating in the Middle East. The word Wadi is Arabic for valley. It focuses on women's issues, and after gaining the trust of local women in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, they learned that female genital mutilation in that part of the country was common, that the procedure was reportedly performed with unsterilized instruments or even broken glass and without anesthesia on girls 4 to 12 years old, with the extent of the mutilation dependent on the experience of the midwife and the luck of the girl. The cutting of the clitoris is performed according to the Sunnat excision, the excision according to the tradition of the Prophet. The locals reported that the wound is then treated with ash or mud, with the girls then forced to sit in a bucket of iced water. Many Kurdish girls die, and others suffer chronic pain, infection, and infertility. In subsequent studies, it was found that 60% of the women in that part of Iraq, which adheres to a variety of Islam, have undergone female genital mutilation. Despite the fact that the United Nations has attempted for decades to stamp out the practice, it is expanding. The clitoris is considered dirty, haram, and women fear that they cannot find husbands for their daughters if they have not been mutilated. Many believe that men prefer sex with a mutilated wife.
You have 2 more minutes, Mr. Cameron.
Thank you. Interestingly, when the widespread use of female genital mutilation by Iraqi Kurds was reported, some members of influential Islamic and Arabic organizations in the diaspora scandalized the findings. They accused Wadi of trying to insult Islam and spread anti-Islamic propaganda. Members of the Initiative of Muslim Austrians called the data part of an Islamophobic campaign and declared no female genital mutilation exists in Iraq. They declared it part of an Islamophobic campaign. And that is the word that you are tasked with legislating the elimination of. Think about that. Is it Islamophobic to voice concern about the safety and security of Muslim women? Is it irrational for a Canadian to be concerned about child female genital mutilation and its continued occurrence in some communities here in Canada, or that there has never been a conviction for female genital mutilation in Canada? This government is always saying that it stands for women's rights. A Customs and Border Patrol report was released this summer to the federal government that said that the practice is occurring here in Canada and that people are coming in to perform it. It is happening here to Canadians, and according to the resources in my paper, Canadians who have constitutional rights under Section 7 have been mutilated against their will. Is it Islamophobic to condemn such a practice? Saudi Arabia just says that it's going to allow women to drive. Is it Islamophobic to condemn the fact that it took them this long to decide to do that? Is Mr. Fattah an Islamophobe because he thinks it's repugnant for women to be compelled to wear burqa? He's a Muslim, and he has said that there is a reformation of kind going on in the Islamic faith, where he is fighting against a kind of popes who pretend to infallibility.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. I think you have gone over time now. And
thank you, milady.
Thank you. You may be able to put the rest of that into response when people ask you questions. And now we will begin the round of questions. The first round is going to be a 7-minute round, and that includes questions and answers, so I'm going to ask everybody to be very concise. Thank you. And we begin with Julie Dershowitz from the Liberals for 7 minutes, please, Julie.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thanks so much to the three speakers for your presentations today. Very much appreciate you taking the time to be here and making the time to be part of our deliberations. I wanted to start off, I'm new to the committee, so I want to make sure that I was very clear with what it is that our objectives are here today. So I think your comments are very relevant. So I'm going to start off just by reiterating what we're trying to do here in this committee. So the part of the motion that we're focused on right now is the part where it says, request that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage undertake a study, so not a legislation, a study on how the government could develop a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia in Canada, while ensuring a community-centric focus with a holistic response through evidence-based policymaking. And then the second part is collect data to contextualize hate crime reports and to conduct needs assessments for impacted communities. And then it presents, there's a timeline that it asks us to do this work and to present it to the House. So I felt it's important for us to reiterate that, just because my questions are going to be very much focused on that, because I'm someone who's focused on trying to get to solutions. So what we are asked to do is another way of saying is, how can the Canadian government develop a plan to combat systemic discrimination and racism in Canada? How can we engage community groups in Canada in this plan? And how can we ensure that this plan is based on evidence and on data? And then when we're talking about the collection of data, how can we collect the data in a way that will allow us to understand the hate crimes that are actually taking place? And once we have this data, how is it that we can conduct a needs assessment on those impacted communities? So based on what we are trying to do, and so I've just stated what we're trying to do, I would be very grateful if I can hear from each of you on your recommendations on if we were to develop a plan to combat systemic racism and discrimination in Canada, what would be your specific recommendations to that? And perhaps, Father D'Souza, maybe I could start with you and we can go down the line. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your kind words of welcome. I'm also new to this environment. I would say, first of all, separate the two. Racism and anti-religious discrimination are not the same thing. And there are people of minority racial groups that belong to majority religious groups, and vice versa. So it's not the same thing, and that would be my first suggestion. It worries me because the language of the motion sort of seems to throw many things together that indicate that perhaps the motion wasn't very clear about what specifically is the danger to be counteracted. What I fear is that when you have an ambiguous problem to solve, you get very wide-ranging solutions that can sort of go in search of a problem. And the problem that concerns me most is that the kind of theological and religious exchange which can take place in Canada, that can't take place in other countries, might be chilled if an environment where one religion, in this case Islam, was thought to be sort of out of bounds for that kind of discussion. So actually, my concrete advice is that I think the government should probably not do too much to encourage theological and religious exchanges between various Canadian groups, because it's not the competence of the government to get involved in which are matters that are really not its own competence. But I would separate the two, and I think that to the extent that there are attacks on, in this case, Muslims, we can cover them with existing laws, but we ought to encourage exchanges that take place in Canada very commonly. I'm involved in some of them myself, between Muslims and Christians, Christians and Jews, Jews and Muslims, plus all the other religions.
2.5 minutes left for everyone.
So thank you, Father D'Souza.
Sorry,
Just I want to give Mr. Batty and Mr. Cameron a chance to respond. If you could kindly, Father D'Souza was kind to give me a very specific recommendation, separate both the plan for discrimination versus racism. If you could kindly give me your specific recommendations, Mr. Batty.
Yes, my recommendation to you that we don't need extra regulation or motion to be combat racism or to protect one religion to other. First of all, we have enough Charter of Human Rights to protect all kind of these things. But if it need to be more, it need to be protect through interfaith harmonies and other objects which we can put together, all the religion together, seminar, conferences, to chill the hatred from one to other. That's my personal suggestion.
I appreciate that. Mr. Cameron.
Thank you. Racism is something that you can't legislate against per se, because it begins in the mind. It exists in the mind, and in a multicultural society where you have a lot of different people, a lot of different religions, a lot of different perspectives, everybody thinks they're right about what they believe in their own worldview. It's not, you can't constitutionally legislate against racism because it's...
So, Mr. Cameron, I'm sorry to interrupt, but right now we are contemplating a study. We're just doing a study. So right now there's no, unless you're recommending a legislation, but everything you've said has indicated that you would not recommend a legislation. But if we were to come up with a plan that would combat systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada, what would you recommend?
Uphold the rights of the citizens. What is in the best interest of this country is more freedom, not more laws.
And how do we do that? Would that be through an education program? Would that be through setting some priorities? How would we do that?
My understanding is that witnesses last week presented in front of the committee about state-funded initiatives to promote multiculturalism in the Jewish and Islamic faith and in the Christian faith. And so the government is abundantly making efforts to ensure that people respect each other, and the Constitution of this nation, specifically the Charter, is founded on a recognition already of those rights. And what's being proposed is additional legislation to quell. So I respectfully take issue with your definition of what the motion is asking you to do.
And now the second questions will come from David Sweet from the Conservatives for 7 minutes. David?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to thank you for the witnesses. Chair, I often talk about full disclosure, and so I want to disclose something else as well. I've had the great honor for almost the past dozen years to serve on the Subcommittee for National Human Rights. One of the most compelling and most tragic memories I have is when we had Shahbaz Bhatti give testimony before our committee. I had lunch with him shortly after that, and he said to me, his exact words were, "David, I will probably pay for this with my blood." And unfortunately, 3 weeks later, he was gunned down in his driveway in front of his mother's house, and he was your brother, Peter. So, and his photograph is beside my desk to continually remind me that what we do here is extremely important, and people's lives depend on it. And so the seriousness of my questions cannot be doubted to the witnesses. And I wanted to say first to Father D'Souza, I agree with you totally that the government has very little competence in regards to religious debate, in regards to the legislating in that arena. We did have a forum here until this session, and I hope it's picked up by somebody else. I chaired it for 5 years. We had the All-Parliamentary Interfaith Friendship Group, where we had Zoroastrian, Sikh, Baha'i, Muslim, Christian, Jews, just everyone who would participate in trying to create a forum. Like I said, I agree with you in the competence, but trying to create a forum where we could have that kind of dialogue. I wanted to mention, Mr. Cameron, it appears to me that you had a lot more to say. You didn't have the capability. I'd like to be able to get an agreement from the committee that the rest of Mr. Cameron's testimony, even though it's in writing, would be submitted for evidence. Chair, if that would be okay.
I will have to get that sense that there's a unanimous agreement from the committee. If I don't get that, we will have to move as per procedure.
Okay.
Is there anyone who wishes to disagree?
Okay, Third Chair, I'll just continue then, if that's okay. I have a number of concerns that come out of your testimony, but I wanted to ask specifically around Islamophobia. You know, we use a term, the only one I know of for religious persecution is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism has been around for over 150 years. Would it be a stretch to say, and I'm really asking you to judge my words in the House, whether they're right or wrong, but I think anti-Semitism has had 150 years to stand the test of time of public debate, of academic rigor, of being pushed and prodded in the public square, and that's why it's generally accepted. Do you think that Islamophobia has had that same test upon it, so that it would be an acceptable term to describe exclusively only hatred towards Muslims? Father, maybe start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. The anti-Semitism is a very interesting term, because anti-Semitism is not the same as anti-Judaism. And the Semitic races, strictly speaking, include both Jews and Arabs and Muslims and Jews. But it is true that over quite a long time, that term has a conventional meaning that is widely understood. So people don't use anti-Semitism to talk about other than Jews that are, if that is the direction of the offending behavior. So Islamophobia is a relatively new term, and what it includes, in fact, the term fear, phobia, makes it seem, or rational fear, phobia, already discredits anything that might be negatively construed, or proposes that there might be rational fears and so forth. So I think it is a problematic term, but it could be 150 years from now, everybody will know what it means, in the same way that anti-Semitism is understood. But at the moment, it's not, and so therefore, both my fellow witnesses here suggest that it could be misunderstood.
And you mentioned, Father, secular fundamentalism, and I'm wondering if you might want to comment on the dangers of a hyper-secular fundamentalism as it concerns broader religious freedom in the context of every legitimate religion is practiced in Canada.
Well, the secular fundamentalism, it's not my term, it's been used by others, says that there's a approach to the public square that says that anything that's tainted, to use that view, by religious belief should be driven out. So instead of a robust public square where religious freedom is exercised by all, you have a preference for a secularist or secular fundamentalist view. Where these things can come together is that if people perceive from one religious group, in this case would be, we're discussing Islamophobia, something that is troublesome, they might resort to secularist arguments to try and suppress all religious expression. And we've seen that in different contexts in different parts of our country. So this is a reality that there is alive in the public debate in Canada, a kind of secularism or a secular fundamentalism, to distinguish it from sort of a healthy pluralism. And it's not a far step from somebody saying, well, we have a religious problem or a problem with some religious people. Better that all religious people are somehow pushed to the margins, and that's the danger that could arise.
Thank you, Father. Finally, Mr. Body, you are actually on the advisory council for the Office of Religious Freedom. And so although you made some comments in regards to your grave concerns about Islamophobia, you actually did lots of work with the broader faith communities of really every stripe while you were on that advisory committee. Would that be a fair statement? And go ahead and expand on it.
I just want to add a little bit more that what is our concern about Islamophobia. I just want to go, when Pakistan was created, it was told to the Christian and other religious minorities that you can be treated equally. But when it was created, after 15 years after, it becomes Islamic Republic of Pakistan instead of Democratic Republic of Pakistan. Then slowly, all the Sharia law and other laws integrated into the Constitution of Pakistan. So our fear, the way it is acting in other part of the world or in our country, we having a continued fear that if it is, we sow the seed here, and what we are seeing in Europe, it can be more dangerous for all of us. Not what we're facing, we are more concerned about our children, grandchildren, that how they will face when nobody can say against anything about one.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. We've gone well over time on this one. And the next person is Ms. Kwan, Jenny Kwan from the NDP.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all three of the witnesses for their presentations. And let me first off also acknowledge to you, Mr. Patty, for your loss of your brother. I think that under no circumstances when violence is invoked because of a disagreement on anything is acceptable. And then to me, so I'd like to express my condolences to your family and for your loss. I do want to sort of get to the meat of, I guess, this motion before us. There's a lot of language around it, and I think fair enough to say from all three witnesses, we're hearing that the way in which the motion was put together and perhaps the choice of words are perhaps not the best. And I think fair enough to say that this is not the most elegant motion that's before us, but I think I'm an ESL student, so I'm not an expert on any language for that matter. English, most definitely, as is my second language. But with that being said, though, I think what we need to get at is the thrust behind it and what is the intentions of the person who moved this motion and what it is that she wants to achieve, and therefore the work of this committee. And I think that is critically important. I also want to just also point out, too, at the time of debate, because the issue centered around a disagreement around the word Islamophobia and what exactly does it mean, it was disappointing to me that the efforts in the House, and I participated in that effort to try to bring the government members and the conservative members to come to some agreement to see if we can arrive at a place where we can support unanimously this motion, with the thrust and the idea of really needing to come together to send a strong message against discrimination of all forms, racism, religious discrimination, and so on, right? That we all stand united with respect to that. Unfortunately, that was not to be, so hence we are here. And it also saddens me, too, that as a result of this situation, we also have an environment whereby some people are using this motion to spread more fear and more hate, and sometimes false information as well. And I think that's not really what any of us want to see materialize. So with that, now we're here before us with the work of this committee. And so I think in the spirit in which the person who moved the motion, the MP who moved the motion, part of the issue where Islamophobia was raised was because, to my understanding, and I think committee members could correct me if they like, but to my understanding was because of the increase of incidents that had been experienced by people from the Muslim community. And in fact, what we have, and we had a presentation from the Assistant Deputy Minister from the Department of Canadian Heritage that cited that recent police report, hate crime statistics, that there was a 5% increase in reported incidents from 2014 to 2015, while hate crimes targeting Black and Jewish populations remain the most common types of hate crimes related to race and ethnicity and religion. Hate crimes against those of Muslim faith increased by 61% from 99 in 2014 to 159 in 2015. So those are official statistics, and unofficially, the lived experiences of many people where they also experience discrimination and hate is happening in our communities as well. In fact, I was at an event where that had occurred in Vancouver East, which was extremely disappointing to me, but those things occur, right? So I think it was in that context, in recognizing that this is happening, that we need to do something around it. And of course, we also know what happened in Quebec with the terrible incident that had occurred, right? So that's in that context of why we're trying to do this work. So, so for me, I guess on the question around trying to de-escalate the fear and the hate and the things that we don't want to see materialize in Canada, I want to ask this question around the definition of Islamophobia. The Human Rights Commission, let me just find that, they actually put forward their definition. This is the Human Rights Commission from Ontario, and they put forward this definition that in their policy, they define Islamophobia as follows: racism, stereotypes, prejudice, fear, or acts of hostility directed towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. And so I wonder if I can get some comments from you around this definition, to which the Ontario Human Rights Commission uses as a definition to address human rights violations in this regard. So perhaps I could start with, is it Father Zuza?
Yes, thank you.
Yes?
You have 1.5 minutes for
Okay,
answers.
all right, I'll be very quick. First of all, even if English is your mother tongue, this motion is both inelegant and confusing. So it's not any problem of it's just a problem with the motion. I would challenge the definition because it begins with racism. Islam is not a race. It's a religion, and you have to treat it as a religion if there's a problem of religious bigotry. So that's my initial comment. But I would say more broadly to your comments that sometimes when government gets into a delicate matter, it actually makes things worse, when it stirs things up. Mr. Boddy was referring to his own work. I was the chairman of that commission that Mr. Sweet referred to, advisory panel. There's a lot of very good work going on in Canada between members of different religious traditions. It doesn't necessarily need a government charter or plan or program to promote it. It's already going on, and I do think that sometimes when you insert a delicate matter like this into a partisan environment, which the House of Commons is, you actually can risk making things worse rather than supporting the work already going on.
Well, thank you for that. I think, there are moments, maybe because I am fairly new to the political arena in terms of federal politics, I come to this table with the hope in my heart that there are some things that we can rise above it, and that is on the issue around partisan politics, that the House of Commons, even though we're from different parties and different perspectives, we don't always have to go down that road. And on something around fighting hate and discrimination of all forms, that we need to rise above it. And so from that perspective, in terms of moving towards recommendations, you suggested that racism and religious discrimination need to be separated, and I'm hearing from you that maybe government don't need to do anything about that. But in the face of increased hate crimes and incidences of lived experiences where people are experiencing discrimination, whether it be based on religion or race or another form, shouldn't the government be doing something, though, to address that?
I'm sorry, your time is up, Ms. Kwan. That's okay. 7 minutes is not a long time when you think about it. I am sorry about that. And now we go to Dan Van Dal from the Liberals for 7 minutes.
Thank you very
please.
much, and I'm going to be sharing my time with Arif Virani. Getting away from definitions, I think there is nobody that can question the fact that hate crimes are on the rise for the Muslim community. From 15 to 16, they increased by 61%. Black community, Indigenous community, First Nation, Métis, Jewish, hate crimes are on the rise. What do we do as government leaders? And I'll go to Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, sir. It is no more possible to legislate against hate than it is to legislate for love. Nobody can compel another person to love. Nobody can compel another person not to hate. It's not the role of government. The role of government is to uphold constitutional freedoms to the best of its abilities and create a climate. You can entreat the populace. You can assert.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. We don't have a lot of time, and there's lots of questions. Mr. Batty, do you want to address that for a few seconds?
Yes, I personally believe that increasing the racism or hate against the Muslim or Islamophobia, we are limited in
Or the
Canada.
Black or the Jewish community or the Indigenous
Yes.
community?
So, as I mentioned before, we don't need other regulation or amendment or any motion. It need to be done to stronger our Charter of Human Canada rights, to stronger that one. And why it is increasing, my personal opinion, because all over the world, wherever terrorism taking a place, unfortunately, any Islamic person is involved, which is getting impact to all over. And that's why my feeling that increase, but we should make strong step to stop that one, that nobody can hate it one to other.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Batty. And the question was, what do we do as leaders?
We have put together everybody.
Mr. D'Souza?
I would say that the Government of Canada does an enormous amount. I mean, there's an enormous amount that the Government of Canada already does through its various departments to promote multicultural relations, to promote anti-racism education. So it's not that without this motion nothing is being done. A lot is being done. We have the entire human rights apparatus that was quoted earlier. The problem with this motion, it seems to me, is that in its ambiguities, it could quell, to use the word of the motion, some of the necessary dialogue that has to be frank and honest and respectful that already is going on in the country. So it's not a question of the government should do nothing, but the government does an awful lot already on this file.
So am I right to say that you're saying we should not be doing any more than what we're doing now? There's nothing.
I would say that, well, it's not that there's nothing that could be done, but what this motion points towards could be a chill around discussing difficult questions regarding Islam, and those need to take place. They take place within the Muslim community in Canada. You're going to hear from witnesses, or you already have to that regard, and they take place between the different faith communities in the country. And however this motion finally comes out, it should not have a negative impact on those discussions.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Virani.
Mr. Virani, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to focus my questions primarily at Mr. Cameron. I'll confess that as somebody who's practiced constitutional law for 15 years, I found some of your submissions a bit surprising, and I'm going to put to you a few sort of propositions, and I'm going to ask you to comment on them. You said it's not the role for citizens to determine what is trash radio. That's the role for citizens, not the government. I would say to you that the Supreme Court has clearly stated in its jurisprudence that there's different types of speech. When speech crosses the line of inciting hatred, it is the role of the government to weigh in, and that's the role for the police and for the Attorney General. I would also ask you if you could tell us why we should prefer your testimony on the point of the impact of radio stations in Quebec in fomenting hatred, as opposed to the testimony that we heard from a CSIS officer in Quebec who's been on the ground studying this very issue. I would ask you to comment on, you said that we should be wary of assuming rising intolerance, and I'd ask you to comment specifically to the statistics put to you by Ms. Kwan as to the rise of hate crimes against Jews and Muslims in this country. And I'd ask you to specifically tell us where in this motion, in its language, and you keep reiterating that it's asking us to legislate, which it is not, where does the actual text of the motion indicate to us that we should be legislating, that we should be criminalizing speech, or somehow permitting female genital mutilation? And the last point I want to state is that you said we can't constitutionally work or legislate to eradicate racism. I would say to you that undercuts the entire foundation of the Federal Multiculturalism Act, all of the human rights codes in this country in every province, including the Canada Human Rights Act. And basically what you're saying is that the Ontario Anti-Racism Act, which is dedicated towards reducing racism, is somehow unconstitutional from your perspective. So your comments, please, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how long I have. There was
Mr. Cameron, I'm so
minute,
sorry.
so I'll do my best.
Yes.
I'd like to seek the unanimous consent of the committee out of...
I'm sorry, Mr. Janice, you're not a member of the committee at this point in time. There are 3 Conservatives already here.
Okay.
You're going to extend his time?
I wanted to seek unanimous consent of the committee to
But
give
you
him an
cannot,
additional
because
3
you're not a
minutes.
member
Well,
Maybe another member might
on
want
a
to
point
do
of
that.
order, then, Madam Chair, I am a member of this committee. I'm sworn in. I would like to seek the unanimous consent of this committee to give Mr. Cameron 3 minutes of additional time. He was asked, I think, 5 separate questions.
I would like to say to the committee, however, that we have a timeline and we have another group waiting to be here at a time certain. I have extended the committee for 10 minutes. We cannot keep going on because we will not be able to
Could
give
you put the question
next
to
group.
the committee,
Please,
Madam
Mr.
Chair?
Please, Mr.
Why don't you
Reid.
follow the rules of order?
Miss,
and
I am
ask-
following the
no,
rules.
you're not. You're inventing
You
as you go
created
along.
Mr. Reid, you asked on a point of order. I'm responding to your point of order as chair. As a point of order, we cannot go outside of our time limits because we
You
infringe
cannot deny
on the
people
rights.
the right to say yes or no.
We infringe on the rights of the other groups who are coming here to speak, and we did that the last time, and nobody was happy about it, so we're not doing it again. But I will
I'm
ask, having
asking you.
said that, I will ask the committee to decide if they wish to extend Mr. Cameron's time or not. I have no from the committee. Thank you very much. We will move on.
So I still have a
So
minute.
no, you've ended your time, but we cut in 30 seconds of it, so I'll give you the 30 seconds. I'm sorry.
That's wonderful. I'll say this. There's a difference between trash and hate. I could say that the witness's testimony from CSIS was trash, and that would basically say it was garbage. I disagree with all of it. There was nothing of value in it. And that's what he's saying about these stations. But the question is whether or not they have a right to raise concerns about certain aspects of public governance, and they do. The second thing is that there are limits as to what can be legislated. That's why you have a charter. The charter places a check on the exercise of government power. Now, I don't like racism. I think it's an ugly thing, but that's my opinion. And I can't compel somebody to with the power of government to form different opinions. You have to educate, you have to have programs for multiculturalism, you have to entreat, but you cannot do it with legislation. And you asked me where in the motion it says for a legislative response.
I am sorry, Mr. Cameron.
Oh, the answer is in my paper, sir.
Good, thanks. Thank you very much. And we do not have time for a second round of questioning, so I will thank Father D'Souza, Mr. Batty, and Mr. Cameron for coming
Chair.
and putting up with a fair amount
Chair,
of...
just before we shift, and I know there was an agreement, but can we get quick agreement that Mr. Cameron can at least submit his answers in writing afterwards?
We have a submission from Mr. Cameron.
Okay,
But
no, but
it was not-
I meant to Mr. Varani's.
Absolutely, Mr. Cameron. You can submit in writing. Submit it to the clerk, but we will send it out to people into official languages. We couldn't give the members of the committee your submission because it was only in English, and that is one of the rules. So I'm sorry, but everybody will be able to get your submission and send us whatever you need. We're always ready to read it. So thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Sweet, for that suggestion. All right. So we will suspend for about a minute to go to the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. This is her. Taking notes, once again, it was only in English, so.
Yeah. Okay. Again, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Committee on Heritage is going to be studying systemic racism and religious discrimination. And we have one witness because our second witness, for the information of the committee, at the last minute couldn't make it. I think the person was ill. So we only have one person on this panel. So Ms. Raza will speak for 10 minutes, and then we will probably, if we do it well, have the ability to have 2 rounds. So we begin. Ms. Raza, please, for 10 minutes, and I will give you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to address this committee. My name, as you know, is Raheel Raza. I am president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. My family and I will have been in Canada for 30 years next year. Like most immigrants, we came here to embrace democracy, gender equality, and freedom of speech. I can say with conviction that Canada is the best country in the world, with a role to play in terms of leadership. And I thank God for being a Canadian citizen to share in its values. Today we are here to discuss Motion 103. Let me make it abundantly clear that bigotry, hate, and racism have to be condemned in the strongest terms. Sadly, they have always been an integral part of human civilization. But human dignity depends on our unequivocal condemnation of these ugly values, and we must speak out against them. Having said this, we are entrapped by use of the term Islamophobia, which is not clearly defined. As I read and reread the text of Motion 103, I can agree with the overall intent, but without use of this term, because Islamophobia can and has been used to confuse the masses and stifle free speech. I've just returned from attending the 36th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, and I have seen how the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has for years been working towards stemming any critique of religion. Critique of religion, by the way, is not critique of people. If there are aspects of any faith that are veering towards human rights infractions, they must be discussed and debated. Religion is an idea, and ideas don't have rights. People do. Canada should therefore be concerned about the rights of all its peoples and not allow itself to fall into the traps laid out by vested agendas. Right now, the world is screaming from an Islamic reform to welcome Muslims into the 21st century by a fresh wave of ideas through the lens of modernity and free thinking, keeping human rights in the forefront. This is not entirely a new phenomenon, because in the 9th century, there was a large community of Muslims known as freethinkers who would debate and discuss all aspects of the faith to come to a logical conclusion. The ruling elite found this to be a threat, and over a period of time, one by one, they were eliminated. This silencing of all debate and discussion in Islam has put us Muslims in a ridiculous position. It also puts a target on the backs of those who want change. Reform has taken place in other faiths as well. Christians will celebrate 500 years of their reform this year. How does reform happen? It takes place through reflection, using reason and logic, and yes, a healthy critique. Without constructive criticism, no faith can grow and develop. As a practicing, observant Muslim, I don't believe I have to be the caretaker or defender of my faith. However, the word most synonymous with Muslims these days is terrorism. Do I want to leave this as a legacy for my children and grandchildren? Absolutely not. As such, Muslim communities have to do most of the heavy lifting in shunning or abandoning negative practices that have crept into our faith and culture, such as you have heard, female genital mutilation, forced and underage marriage, slavery, polygamy, armed violence against civilians disguised as jihad, forceful imposition of Sharia laws, and preaching of hate and intolerance towards minorities. It's through this reform that major changes have already taken place in major communities. We've just heard that yesterday Saudi Arabia allowed its women to drive. In India, the Supreme Court has banned a centuries-old Islamic tradition of a man saying, "I divorce you" thrice, and it was automatically granted. Women in Morocco have helped change the polygamy laws. In Tunisia, a landmark decision was made allowing Muslim women to marry non-Muslim men, which according to Sharia laws is not acceptable. Bangladesh has altered its constitution from Islamic to secular, and the House of Lords in the United Kingdom is debating and challenging certain practices of the Sharia courts. My point is that Canada, with its thriving Muslim population, should be a leading voice in encouraging such reforms rather than encouraging them to hide behind a motion to curtail free speech. As well, in a secular country, which we hope to strive for, the state should have no business in religious matters. M103, as it stands, with usage of the term Islamophobia, has divided Canadians into us and them. By singling one faith community in this motion, it seems that Islam and Muslims are exclusive and demand special attention, when in actual fact, statistics show us that hate crimes against the Jews, the Black community, the LGBTQ communities are the highest. Polls also show that more than 70% of Canadians don't agree with Motion 103. As for Muslims, let's see how bad they're really treated. There are approximately over 100 mosques and 50 Islamic organizations just in the Greater Toronto area where I live. There are 11 Muslim MPs in our government, and Muslim prayers are taking place in some public schools. This doesn't look like systemic racism to me. However, there are cases of bigotry and racism, so I encourage this committee to strengthen the laws to curb hatred and discrimination against all Canadians, not just one section of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Raza. You were very efficient. Thank you. Now we're going to begin our round. It's our 7-minute round, and we start with Julie de Bruzen for the Liberals. 7 minutes.
Thank you, and I would like to thank you for your presentation. And it was interesting, and I appreciated hearing your thoughts. But reflecting on what we heard with the first panel, and then again now, it had me thinking about what are we doing. What are we doing with the study? What's the purpose? And it got me thinking of looking back at Motion 103 and looking at the wording, so I was kind of flipping back and forth. As everyone here knows, it started as a private member's motion. It was brought by MP Ikra Khalid, who's the MP for Mississauga, Erin Mills, and it was read, it was debated in the House of Commons, and then it was agreed to on March 23rd of this year. So in fact, that motion has already been agreed to in the House of Commons, and no law was created as a result of that. And the reason I'm picking on that piece is because you mentioned concerns about free speech and laws on free speech. So it came up in the last panel. So I wanted to be clear, this motion was adopted, and there was no legislation at that point that was created because it was a motion. The result was, there was, I believe if I looked at the wording, a recognition of the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. And there was a condemnation of Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, and take note of House of Commons petition E411 and the issues raised by it. So that's what happened there. And then it was a request for this committee to do a study. which wasn't a requirement, it was a request. So, and I wanted to flag the part just because I've heard these concerns about free speech and what is the impact of a condemnation of Islamophobia. But in fact, the House of Commons had already passed a motion doing that in October of 2016 as well, which again led to no legislation, no curbs on free speech. So that had me kind of taking a bit of a closer look at what we're doing today, because today we're sitting here in an independent parliamentary committee, and it's made of members of all of the recognized parties. You have here Liberal members, Conservative members, member from the NDP, and we've all come together to do this study. We came together and we came together to agree to terms for this study. We came to talk together about how we would go about it, the process, the witnesses that would be called. And now we're all working together, all members from all three parties, to gather evidence for this study that we're doing. And when the study is complete, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be drafting a report, and that report can have recommendations. But what we cannot do, and I just want to make it clear because it seems to be a misunderstanding that's come up, we can't legislate. This is one place where we're not going to create any laws out of this committee. What we can do is create recommendations in a report, and once the majority of the committee has agreed to a final version of the report, we're going to table that in the House of Commons through the chair, and the tabling of that report will still not create any legislation. That's just going to be a tabling of a report showing what our study, what the findings are from our study. And at that point, there may be a response from the government. And so that brings me here today because I was interested by what you talked about laws controlling or preventing racism against all groups was one of your recommendations, and I'm going to pick up on that. But as we examine witnesses and we're gathering evidence for this study, I'm thankful for that. I wanted to make sure that it's clear that the terms are that we undertake a study on how to develop a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia, in Canada, while ensuring a community-centered focus with a holistic response through evidence-based policymaking. And then there's the second part about hate crimes data. But that does involve eliminating systemic racism. There's no halt on that. And religious discrimination, including Islamophobia, but it isn't focused on one group. So just as a preamble to give a sense of where I came to when I was looking at this. One of the really important pieces that we were presented with last week and thought was really helpful to undergird where we're going to be going with the study with the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination findings from the United Nations. And they made a series of recommendations, and I was just going to put them to you as an idea of what you might think we can adopt as some of the recommendations for this committee, because that's what we're looking for. Oh, okay, thank you. And so some of the recommendations were that we collect disaggregated data in all relevant ministries and departments to improve monitoring and evaluation of the implementation and impact of policies to eliminate racial discrimination and inequality. They welcomed Ontario's first provincial anti-racism strategy, and then they recommended that we develop and launch a new national action plan against racism. And then they recommended that we take steps to prevent racist hate crimes against all ethnic and minority groups and Indigenous peoples, facilitate reporting by victims, systematically track and maintain data on the number of reported racist hate crimes, investigate and address the reasons for the 61% increase in racist hate crimes reported against Muslims and the rise of Islamophobia. Now, I'm wondering, when I'm listing through these recommendations, there were many more, if there are any in there that you think would be useful for us to adopt, taking into context everything about what we are doing as a committee here.
Seconds, Ms. Ross, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for, do I have this on? Thank you so much for the clarification. I do believe that it's important to focus on the word all, and I would appreciate it if this was included in all the recommendations. All ethnic communities, all minorities, all sorts of racism. It is the focus on the word Islamophobia that has me concerned, because many of you may not be aware that Islamophobia is a word that was created after 9/11 to stem any kind of critique or discussion or debate about Islam and Muslims. And my organization is in the forefront of fighting radical jihadist ideology, so we have to talk about these issues. And if Islamophobia comes into the terminology, already people are afraid to speak out. You said there have been no curbs on freedom of speech since the motion was passed. I'm afraid to tell you there have been curbs on freedom of speech because people are afraid to use the term Muslim or Islam. Even a question like asking, is it the radicals who did the bombing in London, England? They're not allowed, they're afraid to speak out because this motion has got them worried. And so that they'll be called racist.
Sorry, may I make a suggestion, Ms. Raza, that when others come up to witnesses, you might have an opportunity to finish what you're saying to expand on what you're saying, but that's up to the individual member as they move further. Mr. Anderson for the Conservatives.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just actually want to make a point that it's actually a little bit distressing here to see some of my colleagues basically filibustering their time to keep our witnesses today from being able to answer questions or having no interest in asking questions. And I guess that hasn't been unusual in this debate with so much of this issue. It seems they've been more interested in hearing their own voice than anyone else's. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I'm going to give you some opportunity to ask some questions. You've talked about reform. It's been important to you, and I'm just wondering, as it takes place, we want to avoid the excesses that have happened in other countries. You mentioned the Sharia courts and practices and some of the councils that have been set up. We had a chance to sit earlier or some of us outside committee had a chance to sit this week with Baroness Cox and talk to her, and she has taken up the cause of young women. You've taken up that cause as well. So I'm just going to ask you, can you tell a little bit about the consequence in young women's lives of the courts and how they developed, who manages them, what we can do to avoid some of the problems that other countries are facing in the future on some of these issues?
Thank you for that very important question. I work closely with Baroness Cox and, in fact, have traveled across the Atlantic to give testimony to the House of Lords in England on the exact same issue. As you may be aware, there are over 85 Sharia courts operating in the United Kingdom, and these were established with the blessing of the British government until the problems started arising. So when I had gone there last year, there were witnesses who came forward, many stories and witnesses of Muslim women who were left in limbo because these Sharia courts are practicing marriage, divorce, custody of children with no accountability. I mean, the marriages that they're performing are not they're not recorded in the civil courts by the government. So when a man says, "I divorced you 3 times," as was the practice, the woman has absolutely no recourse to go for any kind of custody of her children, of any kind of financial benefit. So we brought in the victims, and finally the House of Lords, they started hearing the stories, and they understood that the lack of accountability of the Sharia courts was a problem. They also wanted to hear from me our experience in Ontario when there was a move to have Sharia courts, and we actually lobbied for over a year, and we got the law changed, which allowed for arbitration and mediation. And in the meantime, my recommendation to them was that these should be accountable, and they have heard hundreds and thousands of stories of victims of the Sharia courts who are 99.9% the women. And so they are rethinking this issue, and I'm working with Baroness Cox again to try and get this moving.
A question in a little different sphere here. We can't deny there's been anti-Muslim sentiment in Canada, episodes of bigotry and hatred. I think you said you don't believe that that's systemic, but I wonder, what are the solutions to that problem? We have some issues. We have problems in this country. What are your suggestions to that solution? You've talked about reform, but what other recommendations would you have for us?
My recommendation is that the communities themselves should be empowered to bring about change. This is work that should be taken over by the thriving Muslim communities here. We have a large Muslim population. I don't see this happening. I don't see roundtable conferences in mosques or in Islamic organizations in which this issue is being discussed. The concerns, the way that we can deal with it. One of the recommendations was interfaith dialogue, which is an important component, and I'm very involved in that as well. Is, the communities talking to each other. We need to speak with those communities who have faced racism and discrimination before us. Now, every immigrant community that has come into Canada, the Italians, the Jewish community, the Irish community, faced its own sets of challenges. We need to sit with them and figure out how they dealt with it. There were no laws in place. There were no motions in place to help them. I don't believe that a government motion or any kind of a study is going to help this. I believe we have to take responsibility as Muslim communities and discuss and debate this problem and find the solutions from within, and then ask the government how they can help us.
And so who do you see taking the leadership? Is the leadership in the community to do that? Who do you see taking the leadership role? Or does it come back to this committee and this motion and saying some of these things need to take place and the government needs to be involved?
I believe that this is what Islamic organizations in the mosques are there for. There is leadership there. They should take the responsibility. Unfortunately, some of the wrong organizations have taken the leadership. We have been approached by the legal department, by the police department to say, who should we go to? And sometimes the go-to people are not the right people because they are the ones who are involved in the hate messaging. And so we need to be cognizant of that. The people who need to do this are grassroots people, grassroots organizations, and certainly the government can give recommendations and help perhaps with funding to set up groups that can arrange for what I call a safe space between the mosque and the mall for our youth so that they can learn about radicalization and they would not become then victims of the kind of hate messaging that is taking place. But first of all, we have to have an open and honest discussion about these issues.
I'm running out of time as well. I'm just wondering, we've had some witnesses who have come forward to encourage us to put restrictions on freedom of speech. Should we be considering any restrictions, further restrictions on freedom of speech beyond what the Supreme Court has laid out?
Absolutely not. I'm fighting tooth and nail for freedom of speech. There should be no restrictions on freedom of speech. Every Canadian citizen should have a right to ask any question and to criticize those practices that are against human rights.
Just one last question, I guess. You've worked with female-led, mixed-gender, interfaith prayer groups. I'm just wondering, how has that worked, and have you faced persecution? Have you faced criticism because of your involvement in those activities?
I've had my share of threats and hate mail. It's terrible to have a hate mail folder in your computer, but I do. But it has worked well because now there are 5 mosques across the world which are run by women because the culture of the mosques here has been so misogynist and patriarchal. So the women decided that they were going to open their own mosques. And yes, it has been controversial, but every change starts with the first step. And it has been taken up. Today, women in Saudi Arabia can drive. So, this is how change comes, by someone standing up to say that there needs to be gender equality, there needs to be equal human rights.
How is that working in Canada for you?
Thank you. That's, I think,
very well.
Come to the end of that. Thank you, Ms. Raza. Jenny Kwan for the NDP, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Raza, for your presentation. I am particularly interested in the point that you made around the need for interfaith dialogue. I think from the previous panel, we heard one of the witnesses who say that something to the effect that you can't legislate the feeling of hate or love, for that matter, and I think that is true. Although I think it's fair enough for us to acknowledge, though, that hate is a learned behavior. And so therefore, from that perspective, right, where we can sort of address these issues and where I think government can have a role, and that is to perhaps to facilitate dialogue around this. And you talked about the need for that dialogue. So I wonder, in terms of recommendations, because that's where we need to sort of focus in on as well, and that is to say, should the government be facilitating and with NGOs and others to engage in this dialogue so that we have cross-cultural understanding and cross-interfaith understanding amongst and awareness amongst different peoples and different groups. And so I wonder if you can comment on that, and then I have something else to add to that.
Thank you. Yes, I do believe that it's important to have that dialogue between communities, not just faith communities, but between all communities, and to learn from each other. I want to pick up very quickly on what you said, which was extremely important in this discussion, that hate is a learned behavior. Hate is taught. No one is born hating. They're taught. Now, we have certain institutions, religious institutions here, which have been giving messages of hate. I think this is where the government should be involved. There should be accountability of these organizations and institutions, and there are specifics of certain mosques in Toronto and in Quebec where hate, and even the Quebec imam asking for the Jews to be killed. This is not something that we should have happening in Canada, because that is where the hate comes from. So no one is born a terrorist. They are radicalized. We have to go to the heart of where the radicalization is taking place, and those hate messages, if the government is aware of them, should be stemmed at the core, because this Canada is not a place where we want messages of hate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And actually this ties very nicely into my next item that I want to bring to your attention and ask you a question on. You know, in the motion, it actually references a petition E411, which was brought to the House of Commons by way of a motion and was supported unanimously. And I think it's important actually to put this on the record, because all this stuff needs to be put in context of what we're talking about, right? And so petition E11 actually, E411 says this: whereas Islam is a religion of over 1.5 billion people worldwide. Since its founding more than 1,400 years ago, Muslims have contributed and continue to contribute to the positive development of human civilization. This encompasses all areas of human endeavors, including the art, culture, science, medicine, literature, and much more. Recently, an infinitesimally small number of extremist individuals have conducted terrorist activities while claiming to speak for the religion of Islam. The actions have been used as a pretext for a notable rise of anti-Muslim sentiments in Canada, and these violent individuals do not reflect in any way the values or the teachings of the religion of Islam. In fact, they misrepresent the religion. We categorically reject all their activities. They in no way represent the religion, their beliefs, and the desire of Muslims to coexist in peace with all people of the world. We, the undersigned citizens and residents of Canada, call upon the House of Commons to join us in recognizing that extremist individuals do not represent the religion of Islam and condemning all forms of Islamophobia. So I want to tie all these pieces together, and you're absolutely right. Where there is promotion of hate anywhere, that is not, I think, the Canada that we want to see. And so to that end, so in terms of recommendation from the government, it was also suggested that we should separate out recommendations or actions from government on anti-racism as well as religious discrimination. Would you agree with that?
I think what Father D'Souza said, that racism is a separate issue, and yes, the government can have recommendations or motions about racism, but as far as religious discrimination is concerned, I think that the communities have to wake up and they have to start working on this themselves. I mean, what you read out to me, warm, fuzzy stuff like this is wonderful, but it does not reflect the reality and is an actual deflection from the rise in terrorism and radicalization that is taking place across the Muslim world.
So on the question around radicalization, so the government also made, government officials came to the committee and listed some items of what they've been doing. So from that perspective, do you have specific recommendations that you think that the government should embark on to address the issue of radicalization, and how do we actually
Yes, absolutely. So my organization works on what we call the 3 E's, which is expose the problem, educate the masses, and then try to eliminate the problem. The clergy should be part of the solution. And so then we need to empower the clergy to work with the youth and have programs in which these issues can be discussed. But then, of course, if you've got a motion about Islamophobia, then you can't have open and honest discussion about these issues. So first of all...
Sorry, I'm just going to pause there, because the motion is not just about Islamophobia, and I think it's really important that we not just say that this is about Islamophobia. In the motion itself, it says condemns Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. Right? True. And so it's all forms, and Islamophobia is one form, but it's not all the different forms. And also on the issue around systemic discrimination, because in your presentation you talked about it in the context of, I think, Islamophobia. But from my perspective, when we talk about systemic discrimination, a big focus for me is also for the indigenous peoples, right? The systemic discrimination that they have experienced. And so that's all to come, I hope, in the work ahead. So I just want to sort of put that on the record, right? So that there is not this continuing confusion around this, because the more we do that, I think the less we serve in what we're trying to achieve, which I think is a common goal, and that is that we need to fight against discrimination of all forms for everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Sorry, I think the time is up, Ms. Raza. But you will have opportunities to answer. Mr. Van Dal for the Liberals for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. I would just like to perhaps follow up where the Jenny Kwan was at. I just want to make sure you understand that, because I want a response from you. The motion reads: A, recognize the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. B, condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, and take note of the House of Commons petition E411 and the issues raised by it. So you are aware that we're not just talking about hatred against Islam and Muslims, we're talking about all forms: indigenous, black, Jewish hate, we ethnic. We are going to address all of it. Are you understanding that?
Aware of that, but the motion does not mention the other communities by name. Why is the Muslim community mentioned by name only? That is my question, and that, I think, is the entire focus here. It's not mentioned that we are going to look at racism against the Jewish community, against the LGBTQ community, against the blacks. And in the list of hatred against communities, there's also the white man, if you look at the statistics. It doesn't mention any of them by name. Why are only Muslims mentioned by name? Are they the only community in Canada? Are they a special community? Are they a specific community? Are they an exclusive community? Is the racism against them any different from the racism against other communities? That is my question again about the motion.
I'm trying hard to understand. Because Islamophobia is in the motion, you think the entire motion is no longer valid, and in fact, you think the motion is dangerous and could curtail free speech. Is that what you're...
I did not say that the entire motion is invalid. I do believe that using the word Islamophobia, let me be very clear, in the motion will curtail free speech, because no other ethnic community or religious community is mentioned by name in the motion except Islamophobia. And who does Islamophobia deal with? Not Christians, but Muslims. It's Islamophobia. It is, first of all, a coined term. The very term is problematic and challenging for me. And secondly, it's just that one community. So that is my objection to the motion.
I understand. In a recent StatsCan report on police-reported hate crimes in Canada for 2016, one of the key findings is that police-reported crimes motivated by hate against Muslims increased by 61% from 15 to 16. That, to me, is alarming. It continues a trend of increasing number of anti-Muslim incidents. That speaks to a broader problem of hate. I'm from Winnipeg. We have problems with hate involving Indigenous groups in Winnipeg, First Nation, Métis. There's problems of hate crimes against the black community in other parts of Canada, and I can go on and on. My question to you is, what do we do as leaders of the federal government embarking on this study to try to actually stop the hate that's out there? What is it that we can do to better address this issue?
Well, as we have heard before, the idea of hate is an ideology, and it's a very difficult thing to either monitor it or have laws against it. What it needs is better education, better interaction of communities, better understanding of each other. I'm afraid that the Muslim communities have not reached out the way they should have, because I'm part of that community, and there needs to be a better dialogue. I've just returned, by the way, yesterday from Winnipeg, and I know about the problems with the First Nations there. I've addressed the Manitoba Teachers Association, and I have seen that these problems are huge. So why isn't the First Nations issue mentioned? That it's a huge challenge. Why isn't that mentioned in this motion? So we come back to M103. If it says we must study discrimination and racism against all communities, hello, we welcome that. But this is the issue. It's not just the Islamophobia or Muslims. It has to be a study of all kinds of discrimination.
I want to make sure you understand that the 61% increase is against the Muslim community.
I do understand that.
The Muslim community are the victims here.
Yes, and the Muslim community needs to also stand up and take charge of their own issues and look at the problem and decide what they need to do, and they should reach out to the government for help if they need to set up. They have not been awake at the wheel in terms of dealing with this issue. It's not the government's responsibility to babysit just one community. They need to have their own responsibilities, and
so you equate protecting groups against hate to babysitting?
No, but M103 with just one faith mentioned in it is babysitting.
It is babysitting?
Yes.
Do you have that opinion on Indigenous people?
No, I believe that every community, if lumped together, if all of Canada says in Canada, we as Canadians take up an issue against hate, racism, bigotry against every community, then it makes sense to me. When it says Islamophobia,
we have 1
then
minute
there
left.
is a question there.
I have 1 minute left.
Less than 1 minute, actually. Yeah.
People have been calling my office about M103, and they're worried about their freedom of speech being in peril. They're worried about Sharia law coming into Canada. They're worried about people have been calling the mover of the motion and threatening her life. Hate. Where's that all coming from?
Well, we have hate laws in Canada, and it is a terrible thing if people call and threaten someone. I know that because I've also received threats, so I understand.
But my question is, where is that all coming from?
I can't answer for where it is coming from. I don't have a response to where it's coming from, but wherever it's coming from, it's not right. And that has to be also dealt with. Obviously, as I said, racism and bigotry coming from anywhere should be looked at, and it should be taken care of. It's not specific to just one community.
Thank you, Ms. Raza. We are at the end of this session. We're going to go to another round of 5 minutes, and I have people's names on the list. I just, as a chair, want to take the opportunity, because I was here when we agreed, as you heard from Ms. DeBrusen, this motion from the House was not sent with an order of reference. In other words, it did not say that we have to do everything there. And on a motion, this committee could have said, well, we're not going to study it. We are not bound to. But this committee, made up of 3 political parties, I just want to put it in context, agreed to do it. We sat down and we looked at what we were going to do, and we set up the terms of reference and the themes. So everyone around here agreed to those themes. And the themes were clearly based on religious discrimination and all forms of systemic racism. So those were what we were dealing with. Collecting data was another one we're dealing with. So basically, I really would like to see that you understand what we're actually studying. We're not following the motion word for word. We have defined as a committee what we're going to study, how we're going to study it, and we're not having to slavishly follow anything in this motion. So I just wanted to point that out. And we decided as a committee of 3 different political parties, one of whom did not vote for the motion in the House, but we all felt that there was a need to talk about this. And we needed to look at how we deal with it. And I wanted to point out one last piece in the motion that nobody has mentioned, and that says that the committee make recommendations that the government may use to better reflect the enshrined rights and freedoms in the Constitution Acts, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That means that there is Section 2, which is religious freedoms, and Section 15, which is hate against or discrimination against minorities, etc. So I think we set these terms and they're clear, and I don't know that we are discussing one thing that seems to be a focus here. We're talking about all forms. We clearly set those terms of reference. So I just wanted to put the terms of reference of what this committee is studying on the table so that when you have questions later on, you may put it into that context, that we're not slavishly following the motion that was passed. Just wanted you to know that.
I appreciate that. I don't know the protocol here, but am I allowed to ask a question?
No, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. You're on the hot seat, Ms. Raza.
Thank you.
And that's that.
I'm used to that.
All right. We're moving into the second round.
Okay.
It's a 5-minute round. Again, 5 minutes for questions and answers. And David, we will start with the Conservatives. Mr. Sweet.
Thank you, Chair, and I honor your words, but I must add there's two things that are fundamental to that description. One is that we did vote against it, and we did negotiate with the mover of the motion to remove the word Islamophobia because we felt it was endemically problematic and replace it with hatred towards Muslims. And the mover of that motion said that she would not do that. And second, we're involved in this because the motion did pass the House because of the majority of the House, and we wanted to make sure that we are part of the process because we felt it very important. So that's why we're here. If you had a question to ask and you could ask it, what would it be?
This is changing the rules, Mr. Sweet, but go ahead. I will allow it. I will take the
Thank you, Madam
Chair's
Chairman. I
discretion.
guess if I was allowed to ask a question, what I would say is then what is the point of bringing people in for testimony if it has already been accepted and agreed and, you're going to go ahead with the study? I believe that as a Canadian citizen, I'm here because I'm concerned about the long-term ramifications of this motion and that, yes, it is not a bill at the moment, but indeed it could become a bill. It could become legislation, and that would be very dangerous for the Constitution, for people in terms of freedom of expression. I come from a theocracy, so I appreciate the freedom of expression, the freedom of choice, the freedom of being able to express an opinion, even if it is critical. And so this is something that I stand up for and I constantly argue for.
Ms. Reza, how long have you been in the forefront of religious freedom, particularly in the Muslim community, as well as women's rights? Would it be at least a couple of decades?
Yeah, more. I age myself at least 3 decades, yes.
How many countries have come to you for your expertise and communities around the world?
I've given advice to the Swedish government. I've spoken to the British Parliament. I have spoken in the United States, here in Canada as well. And, of course, electronically, I have given advice to other government people in other European countries as well.
I would hope for my colleagues that the biblical phrase would not be true here, that the prophet would be honored in our own land. I wanted to ask you something specifically, because we've kind of danced around it. What is the problem with Islamophobia?
Well, the term.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, the meaning is vague. And secondly, as I had mentioned, the term Islamophobia was coined after 9/11, and you don't have to take my word for it, that it's all electronically available, by an operative of the Muslim Brotherhood who actually said, and is quoted as having saying that we are going to throw this term out there so that there is no questioning, criticism, or any kind of discussion about Islam and Muslims. And I believe that to a great extent they have succeeded. So it's a new term. It didn't exist 30 years ago. I had never heard of it until 9/11, and it was put out there to effectively stem any kind of critical debate or discussion.
So you're saying that debate is a healthy thing, and this term is designed to quell debate.
Yes, debate is a healthy thing, especially in the climate that we are living today as far as Muslims are concerned, because this term Islamophobia obviously deals with Muslims. So we are living in very turbulent times where there needs to be discussion and debate, which is where the Muslim communities come into the picture as well. And so this fear, irrational fear, and I'll give you an example. I've been teaching courses at Ryerson University for the last 5 years, and my course is in Islamism and radicalization. They have to ask the questions, is that Islamophobia? No, it isn't. There are some very critical discussions that take place because they are authentic, they are valid, they are talking about real issues.
In fact,
thank you. I think this is sweet. No, you have 30 seconds, so if you think you can fit it in, go right ahead.
I think you would confirm then what Father D'Souza said, that there's an abundance of healthy theological exchange happening. It's making a positive difference, and this would quell that debate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now we're going to Ms. Dillon for the Liberals. 5 minutes.
Thank you for coming here today. Okay, that's on. We've heard a lot about what Islamophobia means. It doesn't mean curbing freedom of speech, all that stuff. I would like you, please, if you can, just refrain from all of that and give us concrete, positive solutions as to how the government can reduce or eliminate systemic racism and religious discrimination for all communities in Canada. What can be done?
Well, public service messaging is a great idea. It happens in many countries. I've seen it in Europe. I've seen it in the United Kingdom. This is public service messaging in different languages, which speaks about tolerance and understanding and diversity. We already have a thriving acceptance of diversity in this country. I am myself involved in traveling to educational institutions and law enforcement agencies to speak about diversity and the beauty of diversity, which is a very important component in educating the masses. I don't believe that Canadians at large really understand the difference between, let's say I speak as a Muslim, between Islam and a political ideology. And it's important to have those conversations. The media needs to play a more thriving role, not just in upholding one faith community, but in talking about issues of diversity. How do we interact with each other? How do we relate to each other? What are the challenges that our youth are facing in educational institutions? Perhaps the government could stick their head in there and see what is happening there. Are there youth of various ethnic backgrounds who are being targeted? And if so, why? And these are the places where we begin. We begin with youth at a very young age, because that is where hate is taught. And if hate is not taught, then they will grow up to be very tolerant, very accepting citizens of this country. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Canadian values need to be taught to new immigrants coming into the country. So it's all part of a process, and it can be done at various levels and various ways, which I do in a very small way, but if it's taken over by the government, they can have a very healthy dialogue.
Okay. And you spoke about the media. Have you ever approached them and asked them to be more objective in their reporting, for example?
I have. Many times. They hate my guts.
Okay. Okay. And we're talking about racial discrimination, systemic. For example, stopping and frisking black people on the street. What are your views on that?
Well, I think any kind of racial discrimination needs to be discussed at a level where it's happening with the forces that are doing it, and they need to have a better understanding. I believe that the Canadian law enforcement agencies are really handicapped because they're dealing with such diverse communities, but they don't really have the in-depth knowledge. That there needs to be better interaction. Again, I can only speak for myself. They have come to us and asked for some sort of training and insight into to the diverse Muslim communities, of which there are almost 60 different nationalities and cultures that exist here. So, it is up to the individual communities to reach out. This is not a one-way street. So if we want a better life and better understanding of these issues, the communities have also got to play an important role in that, in working with the institutions. So communities, individuals, organizations to work with institutions, perhaps under the umbrella of the government.
Minute, please.
And may I ask what kind of training you have provided to law enforcement agencies?
We've provided training on the diversity of the Muslim communities, a better understanding of the culture, of the ethnicity, of how to deal with them when it comes to issues of law enforcement.
Okay, and did the training make a difference?
Absolutely it did, and they would like us to do more. We are just stretched too thin.
You're stretched too thin. Okay, thank you so much. That's it for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. And now we go to Scott Reed for the Conservatives for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask this question regarding the motion M103 as it's written, and whether this is a fundamental structural problem with the motion. I won't read the whole thing, but the motion talks about the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. That's a direct quote from one part of it. And then elsewhere it talks about developing a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination. And it appears to me that two things are conflated. One is the random or individual acts of hatred, of racism, including the murderous racism and hatred we saw acted out in January in Quebec City. And on the other hand, systemic racism or institutional racism is a concept that deals with things like the differential treatment of, say, Aboriginal prisoners in our penal system. They are, I would submit, two utterly different things, but they are conflated together here, I think, very unnaturally. I'm giving you an editorial. Do you agree that this is a problem with this motion?
I do believe that this is a problem. It gives the impression that Canadians are inherently extremely racist people, and that as far as the usage of the term Islamophobia, that, Muslims are being stoned in the streets of Toronto, and that there is systemic racism. Racism exists. I have said that from the very beginning, in varying forms and at various levels, and we have to deal with that directly. But, to sort of position Canada as a country that is inherently systemically racist, it's not my experience or my belief, and my family and I have been here, as I said, 30 years. I think that that's over-exaggerating it.
When you're...
Mr. Reid, I am sorry, I'm going to have the lights are going, the bells are going, we have votes, so we will have to end this. I'm sorry, many people didn't get. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. Your testimony was very interesting.
Thank you, Ms. Raza. I think we have to go because we have a vote and we're being called. There's a light behind you flashing.
Okay,
thank you. So, adjourn. Yeah, thank you, Dan.